I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's often said that there are upwards of 50% or even more of all people that move to Paraguay end up going back. And that's after they made a decision to come to the country and presumably stay here. And it occurred to me that it's probably useful just to talk about that and to also consider what are some of the very common reasons that we hear cited as to people's frustrations when it comes to making a decision to move back to the country that people have come from. This isn't to dwell on the negative aspects of moving to Paraguay, because the things that I'm going to talk about in this video, well, some of them are real, some of them are imagined, some are overhyped, and a lot of them can be worked around, or somehow you can find a way to deal with it. So it's not about wallowing in our sorrows about all of the things that we're going to be faced with when coming to a new country, but I think, like anything, if you unpack it and see it for what it is, well, that's the first step to solving a problem, in my opinion. Bureaucracy, applying for cedulars, and just generally dealing with the mechanisms of governance and those things that we have to do in order to get established and then remain legitimate. There's no question that Paraguay and every other South American country moves to its own schedule, its own rhythm, and it has a particular way of doing things. To us, when we come here, it would seem to be kind of chaotic and not particularly consistent, and it can really cause a lot of stress. It's not uncommon that we will hear people jumping up and down, for example, because they were told that their cedulars would take this amount of time, but it's taking longer, or something else. Well, that's definitely a factor, but it's a factor in any country. Every country's got its different levels of bureaucracy. But I think when we come to another country, it becomes really hyper-focused in our mind. And often we are really kind of making up a theory that it doesn't work in the way that it should. And back where we came from, things were so much more efficient. Well, maybe in some cases, yes, but I know that in any country that I've lived in, there's always issues with bureaucracy and applying for things. And the truth is, take for example a cedula. Well, you probably haven't applied for a cedula in the place that you have moved from. You don't know what the foreigner's experience is moving to the country that you once called home. So who knows? It could be a common occurrence, it could be quite consistent. I actually suspect that the process in the country that I was previously living in would be considerably more complex, definitely more costly and bureaucratic than what it is here. So we have to take everything in context. Banking, moving money from one country to another, definitely a challenge when you move to another country. The reality is, in this interconnected, increasingly controlled world, the key choke point that the higher-ups are calling upon is the facility of banking and access to what was deemed to be your money once upon a time. There are some requirements when you move to Paraguay and other countries in respect to opening bank accounts and moving your money. And it's outside of the scope of this video because I want to keep it in a manageable time frame. But suffice to say, there are ways that you can work things legally when it comes to your finances. And over time you can become established, move money, and you can eventually move towards being fairly well set up. in regards to your bank accounts and moving your money around and so forth. Buying a house or building a house or renting, it can be initially overwhelming because things are different here, and buying a property is a different kettle of fish. So too is renting. The renting process is different to what I've been used to, and in some cases it can be a lot easier, but it depends where you are and who you're dealing with. Other cases it can be more challenging. That's the reality of living in a place that has, well, in respect to renting, virtually no oversight or regulation. So too buying a property. You can buy a property in several different ways here, and there's no overarching regime to police or regulate that. And it's something that can really cause a lot of heartache and confusion. But for the most part, a lot of that emanates from people jumping the gun, trying to cut corners or take it too quickly, and not just following some really safe steps. And there are some safe steps. We've written a buying a property in Paraguay guide. I'll put a link in the description below. That details a lot of scenarios that people have got themselves into, unnecessary situations that have mostly occurred because people have been too quick to act or haven't followed some essential guidelines that would keep you relatively safe. There's all sorts of variations of how people can get themselves into strife when they're particularly buying a property. Buying a car and keeping it on the road. Oh, there's a challenge for you when it comes to Paraguay. The issue with buying a car is multifaceted, because you're trying to buy something that hasn't been in this country too long, hopefully, because if it has, the chances of it falling into the hands of a less than perfect mechanic is amplified. But to find such a car is kind of a challenge unless you buy it new. And everyone's got a different perspective about new cars. Personally, I don't really see the value in them for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that I think that the modern vehicles that are built today are just planned obsolescence, and I think they're a sad waste of money when you look at how long they will be on the road before something sudden and unexpected trips in their computer and bang, you're off to buy another one. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned like that. Hello, man. But if you want to buy a used car, you've really got to do your homework. You've got to take your time, just like buying a property. No different. You've got to take your time, check the boxes, hopefully find someone competent that can help you out if you're not a mechanic, and then cross your fingers. The next challenge is to find a competent mechanic. All things that we have had challenges with since we've been here. I think that for a large part we've kind of come to a good conclusion, or at least we have some things in place that we feel a lot more confident about when it comes to our transport. Driving and getting around. You've got to get around, you've got to go places, and driving here for some people can be a real freak out. They, for a start, drive on the wrong side of the road, at least for me, and they have some interesting ways of interpreting the rules. I'm kind of not so uptight about that and just go with the flow. When in doubt, I just slow down, and I drive a slow car anyway, so those things combined, I'm for the most part okay. But you know, you have to be on your game. And I know some people get so stressed out about the issues relating to moving around that it can sometimes be I think, an accumulative stress point that people can really build up a kind of paranoia about. And you have to get out and about when you're in a new country, else you can kind of become a bit isolated. So I put it in there because although you wouldn't think it's a massive one, it definitely is a significant issue that people will often cite. And as we speak, this beautiful building is being demolished, and I'm a bit sad about it actually, because it had some of the most beautiful ironwork on it that they've taken down. But I love some of their scaffolding methods and the way that they do things. It's so funny. But yeah, getting around, you just have to kind of get over it. They do have public transport here, better public transport than the place I was living in, because there I actually didn't have public transport in the part of the country I lived, and many other parts they didn't. So they still do see public transport as a social good that needs to be provided, but definitely the standard buses can be pretty wild at times. Where to get things is a really big challenge, and one that really frustrates people, because we've been so used to knowing where it is to go and get that thing that we've always wanted to get. If you're living in a Western country, it's generally just jump onto Amazon or eBay. And you can buy things from Amazon whilst you're living here, but it's a bit of an expense because you have to pay the added cost to get it here. But there are many other things that we want in our day-to-day life that in the place that we've been living in, it's just easy to get. But here, it's like, where on earth? Because one of the things that you have to come to terms with is it's an extremely decentralized business model. I was in Asuncion just yesterday, and as you drive along, you see all these shops that have got amazing things in them. And I'm constantly driving along thinking, I'd like to stop there, I'd like to stop there and check that out, because these things that I'm interested in, there's no way I would find that shop online. It's only by literally driving past or knowing someone that knows that shop's there. So it's up to us to find out where things are. And one of the primary ways that people find out where things are online. Facebook, Instagram. Mosquitoes and pests. This is something that doesn't really bother me too much, because I've generally lived in places for a lot of my life where there's been a ton of those, but for some people it's a real concern. And definitely in some parts of the country there are some issues that you really need to be mindful of. In various parts of Paraguay there are infestations of mosquitoes, for example, that you can really get bothered by, but in other areas not so much so. You also have to be mindful of snakes and spiders, scorpions. Haven't really seen any snakes myself. I've seen the odd spider, no scorpions, but I've had friends who have. But all things that, yep, definitely can really freak some people out. It's a case-by-case thing, and I can't really give any advice on it except to say I hate spiders. But for me, I've just always considered it to be part of life. Gringo Tax, walking into a shop or looking at a property or a car and finding that the price that you thought that they said initially seems to have all of a sudden mysteriously increased. Definitely a thing. Now, it's called Gringo Tax, but I have been reminded by friends of mine who have a bit of money and are Paraguayan, who have told me that, hey, it's not just you. It's really just a factor that when you front up and look like you're a person of means, the price can sometimes mysteriously inflate without warning. Now, I don't know, each situation to its own, and who knows what people's motivations are when that happens. But I can say for sure it is a factor of moving to a new country. It's something that you just need to get your head around, and the best way to combat it is, if you're going to make any purchase, particularly a sizable purchase, do your due diligence before you knock on the door or make the call. You've got to do your own market research, know your numbers yourself, so that you're in the game. And there's various ways of doing that. There's no substitute for having some good Paraguayan friends who can put you straight with what you should be paying for this, that, or something else. But you've got to get switched on when it comes to prices. Hospitals and doctors, something that some people really stress out about. If you went to the hospital in this town, you'd be quite concerned, to be honest, because by our standards it's pretty ordinary. But there's a really good hospital just down the road a few kilometres, the Mennonite Hospital, where we've been for various issues and they've been fine. So too in Asuncion, if you've got the money or if you've got your insurance, you can find good medical care. But there is a wide and extreme fluctuation in standards. But I always try and urge people to just remember that sometimes when we think back to the place we came from, we can sometimes have a rosy tinted view of how things went down there. Now, I could tell a few horror stories about medical misadventures that I've either seen or been involved in. So when I hear people just running off about the incompetency or the lack of whatever when it comes to the medical situation here in Paraguay, noise is something that people often talk about. South America is a very loud place from day to day. There are a lot of people get around and they have a different relationship, particularly to things like music and entertaining, having fun. And depending on where you are, that can really sometimes become a nightmare if you're living next to a doof loving neighbour who likes to party on into the night. Despite popular belief, in a lot of the towns there are kind of rules when it comes to noise. So you do have the ability to call up the cops and try and get that person to turn down their boom box, but you also have to consider what ramifications that can have in regards to your relationship with the neighbours, for example. So these are things that you just need to work through. As I've said in previous videos, the best way to get around it is to do your due diligence about wherever you live, and don't move next to the person that likes to party all night. I know in the neighbourhood I live in, it's beautiful and quiet. We've never been kept up all night by doof. There's significantly differing perspectives and attitudes towards customer service in Paraguay and other parts of South America I've been in. And what would seem to be kind of sometimes not particularly polite service can sometimes be just a different take on what people feel they need to do as people who are working in a situation where they're having to serve you. For example, when you walk into a shop, it's not uncommon that people will immediately greet you at the door and ask you what you want, and if you say you're just looking around, will then kind of linger around and it feels like you're being followed. It's quite uncomfortable, at least I find it, because I just want to look at these things and I've got someone standing right there. And if you didn't know better, you'd think it was kind of not really polite, but more often than not, they're just there because they really want to know whether they can help you. It's just one of those things that you just need to get your head around. Definitely in places like cafes and restaurants, well, that level of service that you often see in a lot of the countries we came from has taken years to establish, and it's been brought in largely by other cultures that came to our country. And we have now come to the place where we often take that level of service for granted. But when you come here, you sit in a cafe or restaurant and sometimes you just kind of have to take a breath, because what you've been used to in Melbourne or New York or Paris, it often doesn't flow in the same way. Just little things that you have to accept. The climate is one that a lot of people kind of really get worked up about. Oh, it's so hot. Oh, it's so humid. It's definitely not going to change, even despite what the gurus would tell us. I think that the hot weather has kind of always been with us, and it probably always will be. So hot weather in Paraguay, humidity, it's just part of the deal. I find that the best way to deal with it is to just ignore it, because it's not going to change. Do what the people here do and just chill out. When it's hot, go indoors. It's not uncommon that people will have a siesta. Not a bad idea, between maybe 12 and 2 or whatever time you set. Just like to have a good fan on, keep something cold around, and just chill. Language and social customs. This one really sneaks up on you, because I'll tell you, for example, one thing that kind of I often sort of laugh about, but sometimes it really quite frustrates me. Every time I send a message to someone, I have to always say, hola, how are you? Or some salutation, and ask them how they're going. And I know that sounds like a little thing, but I saw just on Facebook the other day someone was whinging about it, because I don't really like to type at the best of times with my sausage fingers, and it's just something that you have to observe, a social custom. And there's many such little social customs that are different here to where we've come from. The frustration of being a foreigner. We will, if we live in this country for the rest of our lives, always be foreigners. There's a ton that goes with that, not the least of which is that unless you get your passport, you're kind of on a different level in terms of your relationship with the government, for example. There are certain safeguards and certainties that are afforded to citizens that as a resident, whether temporary or permanent, you're not availed of. So you just need to accept that in some ways your status, if you want to call it that, is different, maybe not as elevated to that of a citizen per se. And I think that that can cause a level of anxiety for people, even if you get a passport. In people's minds, you will be the person that came from another country. Now, that comes with good and bad, I think, because in a country like Paraguay, well, the people are really lovely, and I find that more often than not, they're really curious about where you've come from, particularly when it's somewhere a little bit off the beaten track from where a lot of people are coming from. And you'll find that people ask you questions and they're quite interested. Wherever we are, there's always going to be change. The question is, what changes are we up for, and where do we want to face those changes? And for us, we're happy to be in this place because we feel like, all things considered, we have the most power, or at least influence, over how we choose to respond to the things ahead. Until next time, take care. Ciao.
Smoking room.